There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?"
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And now your host, Stephen Hanks.
So I don't know about you folks, but whenever that opening of my show happens and those speeches come on the air, I still get a little choked up listening to them. The way I got choked up at the recent Democratic National Convention almost every half hour listening to those speeches. So my wife, Beatrice, who we call in this on these shows the Woman Warrior, always tells me not to look at social media before I go to sleep at night, because I do kind of suffer from high blood pressure, and you know she's trying to look out for me. She admonishes me in a very nice way, but I don't always listen, and it's never a good thing, except for last night. Right before I turned in, which I had to do a little bit early because this show starts at 8 a.m. When it's live, I looked at social media and I found two stories that jumped out at me that were very positive and gave me a good night's sleep. And I'll just tell you briefly about both of them. So 6 major book publishers have teamed up to sue the state of Florida over a, quote, unconstitutional, unquote, law that has seen hundreds of titles of books purged from school libraries following right-wing challenges. And the story says that this landmark action targets sweeping book removal provisions of House Bill 1069 in Florida, which required school districts to set up a mechanism for parents to object to anything they considered pornographic or inappropriate. And, you know, we've been waiting for some major pushback once these book bans started. And I'm assuming that it took a while because in this particular case, these 6 major book publishers who were suing needed to figure out how to approach this, get lawyers involved, and team together to counteract this. So that was a good thing that happened last night. The other one, which is something that's been out there a little while now, is that since Joe Biden left the race on the week of January 21st, registrations among young black women increased by 175% in 13 states. And voter registrations among Latinas have also been off the charts. So this is all very good news if we all want to see Kamala Harris and Tim Walz elected. Good morning to all of you out there in Sedona and throughout the Verde Valley listening right now on this August 31st, 2024 through KAZM 106.5 FM and 780 AM Mellow Mountain Radio. Like the announcer said at the beginning of the show, my name is Stephen Hanks, and this show, which is heard every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. out of Sedona, Arizona, is called The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And I also want to welcome from all over Arizona and around the country anyone who may be tuning into the live stream on mellowmountainradio.com and anyone who is listening to the podcast version on Apple or Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. Folks, since I launched this show in mid-July, some people have asked me how I define being a patriotic progressive. And other folks, primarily on the right, have, in a kind of snarky way, asked me whether the label was a contradiction in terms. So given the message of patriotism that was evident at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, among thousands of progressives, I thought this would be a good time to again explain my brand of patriotic progressivism. Actually, I would call myself a proud, passionate patriotic progressive, but that's way too long for a show title. I could also throw in the word practical into the moniker, mainly because I'm a writer and editor and I love alliteration, and one of my guests is smiling at me right now as I say that. So I'll just give you a outline, and I talked about this on my first episode, and the show was new, so probably a lot of people weren't listening yet, but now I have a massive audience, so I wanted to mention it again. So folks, progressive comes from the word progress, and you know what that means? It means a forward and onward movement as to an objective or to a goal, an advance toward gradual betterment, especially the progressive development of humankind. This is the kind of thing that the right wing demonizes. Why? It still escapes me. For progressives, like most of those present at the Democratic Convention, dissent and protest are patriotic. Would you like to hear what being a true politically patriotic progressive means? It's an identity that converges at the intersection of patriotism, progressivism, and civic engagement, aiming to redefine traditional notions of nationalism through a lens of forward-thinking policies. At its core, political patriotism among progressives is a deep-seated commitment to uphold and advance the ideals of equality, social justice, and human dignity. This perspective acknowledges imperfections of the past while striving to create a more equitable society for all citizens. Rather than viewing patriotism as blind allegiance, patriotic progressivism encourages a nuanced understanding of national identity, one that acknowledges both achievements and shortcomings. It calls for a reckoning with historical injustices such as racial discrimination, gender inequality, and economic disparities, aiming to rectify past wrongs through progressive policy initiatives and social movements. Correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but I don't think Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, or the policy goals of Project 2025 come anywhere close to expressing those principles. In fact, they believe the complete opposite. So that's the end of my speech. I was also planning on doing my take on That Was the Week That Was, analysis of national and Arizona politics. But as usual, there is so much to discuss. I thought I'd save that for the latter part of the show and have my guests chime in with their thoughts on things like, for example, Trump's latest disrespect of the military over that incident in Arlington National Cemetery. Or how about Trump's recent flip-flopping on abortion and IVF? Or wondering when Trump is going to kick J.D. Vance off the ticket and make Robert Kennedy Jr. his running mate. I know you're thinking that last comment deserves a big LOL, but hey, with Trump, any crazy thing is possible. So if you tuned into the show last Saturday or listened to the podcast version, you heard what was the first part of a recap and analysis of the 2024 Democratic Convention, which of course nominated Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as the ticket for the presidential election in November. I had three savvy guests with me in the KAZM studio who had binge-watched all 4 days of the convention, and we had a very lively discussion about what was an extremely exciting and inspiring event. So this morning, I want to offer part 2 of our Democratic Convention conversation, which should be fascinating because this time it's with 3 people who are actually there, including 2 of the 85 delegates from Arizona. And if it was exciting for those of us just watching on TV, I can only imagine what it was like for them being in the middle of it all. In the studio with me this morning is Ellen Ferreira, whose political activism is driven by her feminist roots and the future of her 6 grandchildren. And couldn't we all relate to that? Ellen is the proud president of the Democrats of the Red Rocks in Sedona, Arizona, a state committee person with the Arizona Democratic Party, and was a DNC delegate representing Arizona CD2, right? In 2017 in Sedona, Ellen founded After the March Indivisible, as well as Sedona Action Network, which involved leaders of community political organizations, and remains on the leadership teams of both groups. The first 5 years of her career began in Washington, D.C., first working for Congresswoman Bella Abzug from New York, and I remember Bella very well, being a lifelong New Yorker before I moved here, and then as a staffer for Representative Ed Koch, who I also remember very well, probably 2 of the loudest politicians New York ever had, and Barbara Mulkowski from Maryland. Ellen worked for her, too. Ellen spent 15 years working for the USDA food stamp and school lunch commodity programs. Her top priorities now are turning the Arizona legislature blue, electing Ruben Gallego to the U.S. Senate, and electing Democratic candidates up and down the ballot, and ensuring that the Harris-Walsh ticket wins in a landslide. And I'm going to have some things to say about that in future shows. I'm going to be making my electoral college predictions very soon. On the phone is Joshua Polacheck, who was on our show back on July 27th as a Democratic candidate for one of the 3 open seats on the Arizona Corporation Commission. He got through the recent primary election and will be on the ballot for that position in November. Joshua is a 3rd-generation union member and former commissioned Foreign Service officer, serving almost 20 years with the U.S. Department of State. He's the 3rd generation in his family to serve our country, and his overseas tours included Mosul in northern Iraq, Pakistan, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, and the Dominican Republic. And Joshua was a DNC delegate from southern Arizona. Also on the phone is Ted Jones, who was one of 6 Washington state delegates to the DNC from his District 6. Ted lives in Bainbridge Island, which is about 12 miles west of Seattle. Ted grew up in McLean, Virginia, with his 2 brothers and 1 sister, who is my wife, Bea, and as I said, better known, at least to me, as the Woman Warrior. Ted earned his BS and MS in civil engineering from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. After 39 years with Naval Facilities Engineering Command as a civilian, he retired in 2019. Ted's very active in the Democratic Party in his area as a precinct committee officer, legislative district state committee person on the Kitsap County Dem Executive Board, and working on Washington Dem's Affirmative Action Committee and the Environmental and Climate Caucus. 3 very impressive people, and I welcome all of you to the Patriotic Progressive. Hey, guys.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be here.
Great to have you on. So I want to be light with the first question and get that out of the way before we get really serious. So my first question, first to both Ellen and Joshua, is what was the song the DJ played representing Arizona at the Great Roll Call of the States on the second night of the DNC?
Josh, you're going to have to jump in here.
I can't, because I went to the restroom right before and they would not let me bounce on the floor as the roll call is happening. So I actually had a fairly I was pretty annoyed because I missed my roll call. They weren't allowing delegates back on the floor. All these, even the media and people, the special people with their special passes, weren't allowed on the floor. I was like, it's my state doing my roll call let me back in, and there were 15 people deep at the entrance, and I couldn't push my way through. So I missed the song and only got into the roll call.
Well, see, that's the kind of color from people who are there we like to hear right now. So, Teddy, you're a big music buff. I know it's not your state. Any chance that you remember what the Arizona song was?
No, not at all. Actually, being a boomer, I was admiring the beat and the energy of everything, and then saying, I don't know any of this music.
Oh well, it was the Edge of 17. It was the Edge.
Yeah, the Edge of 17
by Stevie Nicks. Yeah.
There is one thing I want to take issue with, though. You said that the arena was mainly filled with progressives, and I will tell you there were a lot of progressives there. But one positive thing is that the Democratic Party in 2024 is the party of America. That we had people from across the political spectrum who understand that to fulfill our promise of America, we need people from across the spectrum. And that's why you saw progressives and moderates and even Republicans there, because there is only one option in November for a political ticket that is going to ensure our core constitutional institutions continue to the next generation.
I second that emotion. Thank you, Josh. I mean, it was obvious with all the Republicans that were speaking what the Democratic Party was trying to do. Ted, I won't harp on this because you just said you're not hip to some of the new music, so you probably don't remember what the Seattle song was during the roll call.
I don't, but I sure remember that just having the DJ for the whole thing brought the thing to life.
Yeah,
I've looked at that as potentially very dry, and it was exciting.
Yeah, well, the song was
I actually remember the Washington and Michigan songs pretty well because those were hip-hop songs from when I was a younger lad. So Washington had Can't Hold Us by Macklemore, which is a song about how the next generation is going to burst in and they are going to take over hip-hop. And Michigan played a song from Eminem called "Lose Yourself."
Oh, yeah,
one of the lines,
right. Yeah,
you've only got one shot.
Yep.
So both of those songs were already in my workout rotation.
Great,
I'm
and
happy to see them in the music.
Good work, Josh. And the reason they played that is that Macklemore is a rapper from Seattle and Ryan Lewis is from Spokane, so it made perfect sense. So since the three of you were actually in the arena all 4 nights, you may not have heard that the magic word being tossed around by the punditry, especially on cable news shows, was vibe. So I feel it's incumbent upon me to ask you how you all felt about the atmosphere and the vibe. What was it really like being in that environment each night? Ellen, let's start with you.
You keep hearing the same adjectives because they work. It was electric. Mm-hmm. It was magical. It was enthusiastic. It was just a wonderful feeling of being together with so many people that were united around this ticket and so enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the enthusiasm, not most of it was, of course, because of Harris and Walz, but part of it was because we have just emerged from such doldrums and such fear and such depression, thinking this was not going to go well. Mm-hmm. And people are just so exuberant now that it was very contagious.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody was on the fence still about Biden's decision to get off the ticket, that convention told everyone why it had to happen, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the first night that Joe Biden was speaking, the applause he got and the chants of "Thank you, Joe" were so sincere because everybody seemed to feel that Joe saved the day.
Absolutely.
This was proven correct by the enthusiasm and unity behind the new ticket.
Yeah. Joe Biden actually is going to go down to saving America twice. Mm-hmm. Once when he ran against Donald Trump and once when he decided not to run against Donald Trump. Joshua, what was your take on the whole experience, just in general?
Yeah, the sense that America is not only worth fighting for, which I don't think there's anyone on this call or listening that doesn't doubt that, but that our freedoms are something that unite us. The sense of unity in that hall, and it was something that, because we were the Democratic delegation, we were within spitting distance of the Fox News suite.
Oh, wow.
And we saw those clips where they were talking about how, you know, things were just like not great, blah, blah, blah. And split screen, there was a sense of unity in that hall, a sense that together, we know it's going to be a hard fight, but that together we can try to fight for the promise of America, the America that instead of going back and going to an America, an imagined past, that we can go to a concrete future, an America that has not yet been.
Yep.
And the sense of possibility in the hall was really something that has stayed with me even a week later.
That's great. That's great, Joshua. Great way to explain that. Ted, how did you feel about the whole experience? And I don't know if you had a different perspective being in the Washington delegation, and especially in a state that is solidly blue, as opposed to Arizona, which is a swing state. But what was your take on the whole experience?
Well, we're blue. We're steadily blue, but we do have large red areas.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I was really proud of the Washington delegation, we had a lot of youth, and we met every morning for breakfast, as most states did. And our youngest members got up, and we had, I think, 8 or so under 20.
Wow, that's great.
We asked them to down to 15. We asked them to sum up what they thought it felt like. And the term they came up with was, it was an immaculate vibe.
That sounds very West Coast.
It was. And, you know, you focus so far on the vibe in the United Center, where we are all packed in like sardines. But we also spent half our days going to caucuses.
Right.
And which are over at the McCormick Center. And my takeaway from there completely supports that, what was just said, that all the constituencies were really trying to one-up each other on their inclusiveness and how much they wanted everyone else to be a part of the conversation. I felt no pecking order among the constituencies, no trying to be the first one at the trough and push anyone else aside. It was labor wins if the environment wins. The environment wins if seniors and youth and all the other caucuses win. So it was a giant coming together.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the caucuses outside of the convention, because a lot of people don't realize how much goes on behind the scenes with meetings during the day before the whole hullabaloo at the actual convention center starts. I know I had the director of this movie Bad Faith that recently came out about Christian nationalism's unholy war on democracy. And Stephen Ulaki was the director, and he was at the convention showing the film during one of the days off-site. So there were a lot of those kind of meetings. I wanted to ask all three of you how much of a chance you had to interact and spend significant time with folks from other states. And if so, what did you learn about what their priorities might be for this election, other, of course, than getting Harris and Wells elected? And I'm sure there was a commonality of what the priorities are, but did you get a chance to talk to people from other states? Ellen?
I did. A lot of it, the bus rides to the convention center
of course,
were
right.
very, very lengthy because security was tight and traffic was just crazy. So there was a lot of discussion on the buses. And I sat with people from Arkansas and realized how much worse they have it than we do when it comes to the abortion issues.
They have a MAGA governor.
Well, they do, but they also have 75 counties where we have 30.
Right.
And they have enacted in that state what is actually one of the ballot measures on our ballots this year, which is that you need a certain number of petition signatures from every single county, 6% of every single county, which makes it nearly impossible to get any initiative on the ballot.
Right.
And I thought, man, as hard as we have it and as difficult as it was to get that 823,000 signatures, at least we didn't have to get a certain percentage from every single county.
Right. That's good. Yeah. Joshua, what was your interaction like with people from other states?
Well, the Arizona delegation happened to be sitting right next to the Louisiana delegation, and one of the elected officials from that delegation, well, first, the congressman was very generous with his time. He and I chatted several times. But my counterpart, Devontae Lewis, who is a public service commissioner in Louisiana, which is equivalent to a corporation commissioner here in Arizona, he and I had a pretty in-depth conversation about what it takes to win in a purple district in a purple state and how the public service corporations can deliver for the people and take our democratic message of fighting for the working class, the middle class, the union families up and down the state, and delivering concrete victories so that the voters see that their lives get better when they put Democrats in power. And having him there was just inspiring. We got to talk strategy. We got to talk politics. And those are the sorts of things that can only happen serendipitously at a convention.
Yeah, that's great. And Ted, what about you? What kind of interaction did you have with people outside of Washington?
So I think the primary interaction was at these breakfasts with our state delegation. We had a number of great speakers, like we had Josh Shapiro.
Oh, great! Yeah.
But where I had most people didn't come up to you and talk to you about what's happening in their state because we're all just running to our meetings. But in the poverty caucus, there was an interesting thing there. I didn't realize about charter schools, how they are different all over the country. And where one group was reminding us that charter schools were often created as just a place to have white kids who can afford it not have to go to public school anymore. In other states, it's being used for very progressive purposes. And in Virginia in particular, they had a African-American woman who was one of the new board of directors members for the Charter School Association, and how their goal is exactly the opposite of that. So it was refreshing to hear that even though the problems sound the same, the situation on the ground can be very different state to state.
Yeah. So Ted, while I've got you, being from Washington State, which I think should be pretty much of a lock for Democrats, as opposed to a swing state like here in Arizona, what are the 2 to 3 most important issues to voters in Washington heading into this election? I mean, we could all be on the same page in terms of the issues, but there are differences depending on where you are. So what do you feel like the 2 or 3 most important priorities are in Washington?
So certainly protecting reproductive health rights. Washington State, as soon as Dobbs happened, our governor put in place legal protection for people fleeing from restrictive states and no extradition to other states and really help with that. So we're big on that. We're united on that. The threats to democracy, instead of being how you vote, it's who counts the votes. That's ridiculous. We have one of the best all mail-in voting systems in the nation. And we just wish so many more places could have that. Environment also, or maybe that's just me, but it's really a green state with under all that blue.
Right. Well, your governor's been one of
green energy solutions.
Yeah, your governor Jay Inslee's been one of the champions of the environmental movement in the country. So
he's been a true leader on that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I have to say, Jay Inslee was at our last morning breakfast on Thursday, and I loved what he said. He said, I'm sorry I missed Woodstock, but at least I was at Chicago 2024.
Yeah. So Joshua and Ellen, I want to start with Joshua. It would be interesting to hear if your 2 or 3 priorities are the same or different. But Joshua, what would you say are the key things going into this election, aside from making sure that the voting is on the up and up in Arizona?
Sure. I mean, obviously, the core, protecting our core constitutional order is the key to any election. But on an issues front and a values front, this is an election about freedom. At least it is for us.
Right.
We are fighting for people's, freedom to control their own bodies, especially in a reproductive setting. Freedom to be able to build a good middle-class life for yourselves. Freedom for everyone who wants to join a union to be able to join a union. This is a campaign where the choices are very stark. You've got one group who wants to hoard freedom, to keep it only for themselves and the people that they get to approve of. And you have the other group, you have Democrats, Republicans, and independents who are coming together to say that this is it's one nation, that all men and women are created equal, that our promise going back to the Declaration and our Constitution applies to all Americans. And one of the things I was very proud of with our delegation, Arizona is one of the highest indigenous populations in the country, mm-hmm. and our delegation had a huge number of not just tribal leaders. We had several governors and chairmen and presidents from tribal nations, but also folks who are just everyday Americans who happen to be indigenous Americans who were active in the Democratic Party and elected to represent our party from all 15 counties of the state. So what we're really fighting for, it's a question of values.
Yep.
Want
Go ahead.
America that everyone has a shot for. So that's what we thought we were fighting for.
Ellen, to pick up on what Joshua just brought up with the indigenous community, one of the scary things going on now is the Supreme Court backing up the provision about in Arizona to have to show ID for voting, voting, and this is going to affect the Native American community seriously again, because that's what the goal is. The Native American community came out really strong for Biden in 2020, and I think the Republican Party in Arizona is going to do their best to keep that vote down, because it is hard for a lot of the Native Americans to get ID. And that's not just in Arizona, it's in other parts of the country. Did that issue come up? Did you hear much talk about that at the convention?
I did not. And I went to the Native American caucus one of the days.
Mm-hmm.
They were focused on people who have left the sovereign lands and are now living in urban settings.
Mm-hmm.
But that did not come up.
Okay. It's probably going to be a big discussion from now till the election day.
Well, it will be. There is a group called Spread the Vote, and it does nothing but help people get through the bureaucracy and red tape of trying to get identification.
Right.
Yeah.
Josh, were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, well, so that decision broke just as we were heading, at the convention itself. And so we actually helped get some folks to talk to media outlets about this and the impact that it was going to have on our indigenous communities, on our immigrant communities. But also, one of the things that folks need to realize, that this idea of the show your papers thing hits mm-hmm. everyone in different ways. And in Arizona, the group that is most likely to be on what's called the federal only ballot, or people who register to vote but do not have a proof of citizenship when they do the initial registration, are most likely to be students.
Right.
And they spread this as a voter suppression tactic, and they target it in a very racial way. But it is also targeted at students because they know that the students understand that they are looking for the future, and the people that are trying to keep their votes off are only trying to take as much as they can from the present.
Yeah, well, the suppression of student votes in colleges in various states has been going on probably for a couple of decades. I mean, that's one of the big constituencies that Republicans are trying to suppress the vote from. Ellen, the priorities for you in Arizona.
I think Joshua did a good job of covering those, and Ted as well, because we're
all pretty much on the same page.
The same kinds of values, but I think education, their freedom to get a good, decent public education is very front and center in this state.
Especially with Project 2025 saying they want to eliminate the Department of Education.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's got to be protected.
But the vouchers is something that are, prominent all over the country, and they're going to bankrupt the state of Arizona, and it does not help kids that are going to public schools.
Yeah, that's for sure. Ted, I wanted to ask you, before I go back to Ted, Joshua, what's your take on the chances of the Democrats flipping the Arizona legislature in this election?
Well, I am very hesitant to put numbers out there because we know this is going to be an incredibly close election. It's going to come down to a dozen votes in every precinct across the state, whether we're talking about winning the state for the Harris-Walz ticket, sending Ruben Gallego to the Senate, flipping the Corporation Commission, flipping U.S. House seats, flipping our state legislature. We need to fight for every single seat. So the chance is there. We know it's possible, but we are not going to count any chickens until not just they hatch, but they are full-grown chickens.
Yeah, I agree. Do you, Ellen? You can answer this too. Do you think the way it's kind of obvious that Kerry Lake's campaign is really tanking? And again, I mean, I don't want to get too wrapped up in poll numbers because they can be problematic, but the numbers are looking very good for Ruben Gallego in terms of how much he could win by. Do you think there's a chance he could pull legislative seats in with him? Flip that?
That's always the hope.
Yeah.
That others will ride along on the coattails. That's the hope. But let me just mention that there has been an active progressive community in Sedona and elsewhere around the country that is focused on state legislative races.
Yeah.
And what we have been doing, we've been sending thousands and thousands of postcards to people who are not registered to vote, but it's determined that if they do register, they will most likely register Democrat.
Right.
And so the voter registration via postcard effort has been going strong for many, many months. And I think that will have an impact. We send them the QR code. We make it very easy to just register from their house. And then we're about ready to shift into get out the vote efforts. We have to get people to the polls. That's the whole thing.
That's great.
We have to get them registered and to the polls.
Yeah, and if the data is any indication, like I said before, registration among Democrats or new voters is really off the charts, which is really great to see.
We need Taylor Swift to endorse.
I think that's happening.
Harris-Walz to urge people to vote.
Speaking of endorsements, I'm starting to see on social media that Liz Cheney is going to make an announcement in September about endorsing. And I don't think it's going to be Donald Trump. So
I can't imagine that.
No. Ted, I wanted to ask you about a few of the big races in Washington State this cycle. The Democrats obviously need to keep the Senate in this election. You've got an incumbent in Maria Cantwell running against Republican Raul Garcia. Cantwell won the nonpartisan primary by more than 360,000 votes, so I'd like to think she's pretty safe. On the governor's side, you've got popular Democrat Jay Inslee term limited out. So the choices between Democrat Bob Ferguson and Republican Dave Reichert. And in the primary, Ferguson won by about 175,000 votes. So is it pretty safe to assume a Democrat will be the new governor? And what about the Attorney General and Secretary of State races in Washington?
Sure. So one historical fact, whenever Washington gubernatorial race doesn't have the incumbent on the ticket, it's a tight race.
Okay.
Jay Inslee won by like 1,200 votes the first time around. And right now, since he's not on there, Dave Reichert, who's run before, he has a lot of deep red support. He's fractured. I don't know how much it made the national news, but the state GOP had their own convention, and Dave Reichert walked out of it and called it a freak show.
Oh boy!
And they've nominated the official Republican as a man named Semi Bird, who's about as MAGA as it gets. But he's not going to take much away. It's really down to Reichert and Ferguson. Ferguson's really popular, but it's. But I'm comfortable, but I'm not sure. I can't take it for granted.
In that primary, though, didn't the Democrat come in third in that nonpartisan election and get a lot of votes that we could assume would end up in Ferguson's numbers?
I can't remember who was first, second, and third. The GOP did something really interesting here. At first, they nominated 4 other people named Bob Ferguson.
Unbelievable.
And Ferguson, being the Attorney General, he contacted them all and said, this could very easily be construed as election fraud, and they all withdrew.
Oh, boy.
I mean, there's no bottom to what MAGA tricks happen at election time.
Well, speaking of MAGA tricks, Joshua, go ahead.
I did want to put in a pitch for the mail-in voting because...
Oh, Ted, yeah.
With our process, it's a 12-month of the year deal. You can check at any time to see if your voter address registration is valid. After you submit your ballot, you can see that it's been counted. Do this all online, so there's no threat that somebody's going to collect your collection box 2 hours early because it's a long drive to get back to the state capitol, or that they're just going to close the polls because it's dark.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's talk about some recent issues and controversies that have popped up in the campaign, and they seem to be happening a mile a minute. Joshua, as someone who has served in the military and worked in the State Department, I'm anxious to hear your thoughts.
No.
What?
I want to be very clear. I was a commissioned civilian officer. I have served with the military, but never in the military.
Oh, I got it.
Always a civilian alongside my uniformed sibling.
Okay, well, I'm still anxious to hear your thoughts on that episode with Trump at Arlington Cemetery. So, how does someone with your background?
Yeah, do you have the beep so that you don't get an FCC violation? I have to tell you that my anger is off the charts. That I have gone to ceremonies of my military brothers who were killed in action in Iraq, representing the State Department in some of these ceremonies, and some of those brothers are buried at Arlington in Section 60, and to see what he did there, and I just have to stop myself because that was beyond the pale. We keep saying that he does things that are beyond the pale, but this is something that should unify Americans. These are the people who gave the ultimate sacrifice, and he is cheapening their sacrifice by bringing in his tacky version of politics into it. And I am 100% sure that the people who gave their lives, their families, did not consent to being used for these cheap political tricks. And in any other election, this would be disqualifying, and the person would be called on by his party to resign.
Absolutely.
Somebody with the courage within Trump's party to stand up to him and tell him he needs to quit the race for doing such a stunt.
I hate to
Steve,
play.
Could I jump in there?
Well, Ted, I actually wanted your opinion, but before I get to you, I just wanted to add. I hate to play this game that a lot of us do. The what if it was Barack Obama or Hillary, and I think you could all agree with me that if this happened, well, it wouldn't happen under Barack Obama because he wouldn't do something this crazy. But if it did, we would never hear the end of it. It would be 24/7 on the news constantly. And I don't, as much as the media is kind of covering it, it's not even close to what it should be. Ted, what's your take on this? I know you wanted to chime in, and I did want to ask you, given that your dad, my father-in-law, was in the military for a while.
Right, and so both my parents are buried there, as are some close friends.
That's right.
And the idea that you can politicize events there, the sitting president, commander-in-chief, has business being there. And I've been to many Memorial Day wreath layings and Veterans Day celebrations there. But to, even briefly accept the idea that you can bring your president to come and speak on behalf of a burial is just wrong. They died serving the nation, not a personality cult. And I agree completely that if this had been a Democrat pulling such a tasteless stunt, the coverage would never stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Ted, while I've got you, you spent your professional career as an engineer, so I'm guessing you were very interested in the Biden administration finally getting a major infrastructure deal done after about 50 years late. The infrastructure is something I've been harping on since I was in college, and that was in the 70s. And again, I hate dating myself, but it finally happened. What do you know about how any infrastructure money is getting into Washington?
It's funny you asked that. I was sitting next to a guy on one of these long bus rides. It was the night that we were delayed 2 hours due to security getting into United Center, and he was grinning from ear to ear. And I said, "What did you just read?" And he is a building design construction consultant, and his firm had just received a $300 million purchase order, phase one, for building a new chip plant in Moses Lake, Washington.
Wow, great.
And so through the CHIPS Act, through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, money is really flowing for infrastructure. And the other piece of infrastructure was I was so glad to see Governor Wes Moore from Baltimore, the Francis Scott Key Bridge governor, and what he had to say about within hours of the ship hitting the bridge that Kamala was there and Joe was on the phone, and they got that cleared in record time. So I hope the nation sees that the infrastructure that Trump promised every week and that going back to Reagan, the Republicans have been refusing to touch, it's finally happening.
I was.
And we're not just talking toll roads.
Yeah.
And Steve, one of the things on infrastructure that we need to really be aware of is that in Arizona, there are MAGA folks in the state legislature and on the Corporation Commission who have been actively hostile to bringing in money from the Inflation Reduction Act. And we have lost millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of federal investment because they didn't want to give a so-called win to the Biden administration. And we're talking about roads, clean energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, and they are simply playing politics with our essential utilities and our essential infrastructure, and they need to be held accountable for that.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable. When I hear things like that, it just, I hate to use the cliche boggles my mind, but I just can't wrap my head around it. I'm glad you brought that up, Joshua, because I wanted to make sure before the end of the show that we got you to talk a little bit about your Arizona Corporation Commission race. You're one of the 3 Democrats that are running in November. So tell us a little bit about where that is and what the situation is for our listeners in Arizona.
Sure, I really appreciate the opportunity. So for the listeners who have maybe seen this on their ballot before but don't remember what it does, the Arizona Corporation Commission is your elected utilities regulator. We are the people that make sure that the monopolies that you don't have a choice about using, whether it's your gas or your water or your electrical company, that there is an elected body that looks over every part of the bill, the service they're delivering, how they're getting their service, and making sure that your voice is heard through these elected representatives. And currently, the commission has a 4-1 MAGA majority, 4 MAGA people, 1 Democrat, Ana Tovar, and there have been just a series of 4-1 votes to do everything they can to undermine the future that Arizona deserves. So the people of Arizona deserve better. That is why Eleni Aguilar, Jonathan Hill, and myself, Joshua Polacheck, the 3 of us are running for the Corporation Commission as the Democratic nominee.
Great. So I hope all our Arizona and Sedona listeners heard that. Make sure you vote for those 3 candidates on the Democratic side for the Arizona Corporation Commission. Very, very important, as you just heard Joshua talk about the issues that affect everyone in this state. And it'll be for the next 4 years at least. So please be on top of that when you make up your ballot. So Ellen, as president of the Democrats of the Red Rocks here in Sedona, your organization's going to have a lot on its plate the next 2 months. Do you sense a new energy in Dorr since Biden endorsed Kamala? And what are Dorr's priorities going to be for the rest of the campaign, besides the presidential and getting Ruben Gallego into the Senate?
Those are our priorities.
Okay.
And we are very busy. We have
some local races.
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, up and down the ballot.
Right.
We're preparing now a ballot card that will give Dorr's recommendation. Dorr stands for Democrats of the Red Rocks. Our recommendations for candidates and also our recommendations for ballot propositions, all of which are very important. We are having a Meet the Candidates picnic on September the 15th, and all 3 of the Corporation Commission candidates will be there.
Oh, that's great.
You'll be able to hear from them and speak to them, and we appreciate them driving up to Sedona to be there at our picnic. You can read more about it on the Dorr website, but it's September the 15th, starting at 1:30 at the Hub.
I'll finally get a chance to meet Eulania in person.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we have monthly breakfasts on the 3rd Friday of every month. And this next one, we're having Nikki Check, who's running for supervisor in District 3, county supervisor in Yavapai. We're also having Jonathan Nez, who is running for the U.S. congressional seat from CD2. Against MAGA, horrific Freedom Caucus member of Congress, Eli Crane.
I'm glad you put it that way, because I was going to say exactly that way.
Yes. And Jonathan Nez is former president of the Navajo Nation. He would be the first native coming from Arizona to represent us in the U.S. Congress. So that would be wonderful to get him elected. So those 2 are going to be at our breakfast on September the 20th at the community center. But we're also having a fellow named Tim Stringham. Tim is running as the Democrat for county recorder in Maricopa County, the state of Maricopa, as we put it. It is a critical position, and he is running against an election denier.
Of course.
And having a MAGA election denier as county recorder in Maricopa County is very, very major and very scary. And we need to see that Tim Stringham gets elected. We can't vote for him here. However, we can donate to his campaign and do whatever else we can do to help him. So he will be appearing on September 20th at our Dorr breakfast.
I'm glad you brought that up. Isn't that the position that Adrian Fontes had before he was Secretary of State?
Adrian Fontes did have that position. And then Stephen Richter, who has been just such a powerhouse. He's Republican, but he stood up against the election deniers and
they got him out.
Was terrific, and they got him out.
Yeah.
Yes, he was not reelected.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because as I've said many times, people at Dorr, including you, my big hobby horse among all the issues is voting rights, because, and I think you guys would agree with me, that's the bedrock principle. I mean, we need to do whatever we can to secure voting rights, because all these other issues that are important to us can't happen unless. So we've got to stop this voter suppression. We've got to stop this voter nullification. We've got to stop all the things that the MAGA Trump party is trying to do to suppress votes and manipulate these election boards. I mean, it's off the charts what they're trying to do, especially in places like Georgia right now. Right. So it's so we're getting close to the end of the show, and I wanted to give all of you a chance to just kind of say, take a minute to say whatever is on your mind. We've got 5 minutes left before we close. So, Ted, I'll start with you. What would you like to say before we take off?
Well, thanks. We had all spent the election week getting to know Kamala and Tim a lot better and hear their backstories, which was fabulous. But we can't forget to celebrate what the Biden-Harris administration has achieved.
That's right.
And I think one of the most telling places to look at that is Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, Native American, first ever. And to put a traditional steward of the land and to elevate to a cabinet position, such a talented Native American, it's just such a thing that the Democratic Party does.
Right.
And you couldn't be in starker contrast to let's give the Department of Interior to, James Watt in the Reagan administration, and let's just make it all. And that's what I'm really excited about, is that the Harris-Walz administration will continue so many of these great policies, but now we have a campaign that has the energy of youth and real generational torch pass that I think is being handled spectacularly.
Yeah, as long as they do something about the Attorney General position, and I'm not going to expand on that right now. That's for another show. Joshua, final thought.
Just what I said at the beginning when you talked about the what sort of chance do we have to flip the state legislature? The confidence that we have going into the U.S. Senate race, the Corporation Commission race, and even the presidency. We know that we have to fight for every single vote. Do not take a single thing for granted. You've heard me tell the story about how I was in Peoria and talked to a red-ribbed conservative who'd never voted for a Democrat before. I told her what the constitutional duties of my office were, and she saw the Republicans betraying the promises that they had made as the elected majority on the Corporation Commission. We need to get out there and have those hard conversations, have the easy conversations. Please make sure, you go to your best friend who's like, oh, well, I like Harris, but I'm not sure that my vote's going to matter. Make sure you have those easy conversations, getting those people to vote. But then go ahead and have the hard conversations.
Right.
Talk to the people you haven't talked to because politics have driven you apart, and present the democratic values and the democratic vision. And we believe that will lead us to a victory. It's going to be a hard-fought and a close victory, but when we fight, we win.
That's right. Ellen, thank you, Josh. Ellen, tell everybody how they can get information about DOOR.
This is the time. Democrats of the Red Rocks, go on democratsoftheredrocks.org. But also, if you want to contribute and help with state legislature races, there's something called the Arizona Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, ADLCC. They are steering money toward races that are winnable, and we need to support them in every way we can. One last thing, the enthusiasm, I hope it continues. People are walking into our office every single day contributing money, volunteering for time, they're canvassing. This is a short period of time that we have, and we're there. So we've got to put the pedal to the metal now and do everything that we can. And DOOR is there to channel all of your energies. Every single day we need to be doing something to help make sure this ticket prevails up and down the ballot.
Great. Thank you. I totally agree with that. Well, I want to thank my three guests today for being on the show. Ellen Ferreira, President of the Democrats of the Red Rocks, Joshua Polacheck, who's running for the Arizona Corporation Commission, and Ted Jones, who is a political activist in Washington State, all of whom were at the Democratic Convention. Thank you so much for being on the show, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, and to you and all your listeners.
Thank you. Well, my friends, that's it for the Patriotic Progressive on KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio for today. Many thanks to my producer in the booth, Ryan Thompson. Please tune in again next Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. when we'll be talking about the major issues in the 2024 campaign. Remember, you can live stream our show on mellowmountainradio.com and check out the podcast version on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Thanks for listening to the Patriotic Progressive for truth, justice, and the democratic way. Have a great week, everyone.